Happy Monday, and welcome back to the Lorden Arts channel. I'm John Lorden. Thank you so much for spending some time with us here today. This is the first episode of Case Cracked for 2022. In case you didn't know, Case Cracked is the show where we look into a mystery and what are the critical pieces that help solve that mystery. Today's episode is called Alligator Tears. Mike Williams and Denise Merrill met in junior high at North Florida Christian High School. After graduation, they both attended Florida State University. Denise would go on to become an accountant for the state, and Mike became a very successful real estate appraiser for Ketchum Appraisal Group. Known for his 15-hour workdays and savvy business dealings, Mike's career was on an upward track. In 1994, he and Denise got married, and just before Mother's Day in 1999, she gave birth to their daughter, Ansley. On December 16, 2000, the couple's 6th wedding anniversary, Mike left their Tallahassee home and told Denise that he was going to duck hunt at Lake Seminole, something he did often. Then he would come home so they could start their anniversary with a trip to Apalachicola, Florida. When he didn't return on time, Denise called friends and family to see if anyone knew where he was. When she was unable to track him down, the police were called. Within 12 hours, Lake Seminole was being searched by water, land, and air. Mike and Denise's family were there, along with other volunteers from the community, such as Mike's best friend since high school, Brian Winchester. The first day of the search, Brian found Mike's boat, which contained decoys and his shotgun. Fearing Mike had fallen into the lake, investigators focused on identifying the contents at the bottom of the lake. They found nothing, and cadaver dogs never picked up a scent. One local who helped in the air searches saw something that bothered him, though. He said, quote, "You know, one of the things that I noticed, there were no less than 15 to 20 very large alligators swimming all around this area." 44 days later, the search for Mike was called off. Some thought he had run off to start a new life, which made little sense to others. The most prevalent theory, however, was that Mike had been eaten by alligators, but people weren't quite certain about that either. 6 months after his disappearance, a local fisherman found waders floating in an area of Lake Seminole that had already been searched. After 2 more days of searching, investigators found Mike's hunting license, jacket, and flashlight. How had these items not showed up in the initial search, and why did the waders appear to have not been in the water for very long? The newly found items showed no signs of a struggle, particularly an alligator attack. This made local authorities even more suspicious. By this time, Denise and 2-year-old Ansley had begun to struggle financially. Luckily, Mike had seen to his family's future by taking out 3 life insurance policies worth $1.75 million. While investigators still officially considered this a missing persons case, Denise petitioned the courts to release the money, something they almost never did at this stage of an investigation. In Florida, the person in question has to have been declared officially dead for the money to be released. However, her attorney successfully argued that by finding Mike's waders and other belongings, they had all the proof they needed that he was dead. The judge concurred, and Mike's official cause of death on his death certificate read, "Accidental drowning while duck hunting on Lake Seminole. Body has not yet been recovered." Mike's mother, Cheryl, had many doubts. She knew her son and knew he would never leave his family or job. She had problems with everyone's theories and had always felt that Mike was likely dead, but it wasn't from an accidental drowning. Quote, "He may be dead, but he's not in that lake. And if somebody did hurt my child, I want him found and I want him punished." In order to have a case that would sway investigators, Cheryl began to write everything down and punch holes in everyone else's theories. As she did, inconsistencies started adding up. First, she contacted wildlife experts to see if the alligator attack theory was valid. She got a strong no. Mike disappeared in winter months, and alligators don't feed during that time. One expert said that while an alligator attack, quote, "may be a convenient explanation for the authorities, it was virtually impossible." The biggest inconsistency was the largest life insurance policy. It had been taken out just 6 months before Mike's death and was for $1 million. This policy surpassed all the others. The insurance agents who sold it to him was his best friend, Brian Winchester. Cheryl knew that Brian and Mike often spent time together, sometimes with their spouses, but not much else. Eventually, Cheryl had 27 single-space pages of notes and theories. She took it with her everywhere she went to try to convince local authorities to take another look at her son's case. The last line on the last page read, "Please help me find my son." During this time, she also wrote a letter to the governor of Florida every day for 9 years. Sadly, she lost all contact with her granddaughter, Ansley. Denise gave her mother-in-law an ultimatum: stop looking or lose your granddaughter. Although it broke Cheryl's heart, she felt she had to choose her son. In 2004, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, or FDLE, took an interest in Mike's case. And in 2005, something very unexpected happened. Denise and her deceased husband's best friend, Brian Winchester, got married. With ever-growing suspicions, it was decided that new interviews had to be conducted, and the first would be with Denise. Denise's interview was very matter-of-fact. She repeated to investigators the same thing she had said when Mike initially disappeared. Brian was up next, and he told investigators much more. He stated that on the day that Mike went missing, he was 60 miles away, oversleeping for a hunting trip with his then father-in-law. What Brian didn't know was that investigators had a witness who saw him at Lake Seminole that morning. Even more damning was the statement of his ex-wife. She claimed that Brian and Denise had been having an affair since 1997, and Mike knew nothing about it. With no more evidence at hand, the case stalled. That was until Brian and Denise started to have marital problems. Florida law states that, quote, as long as they stay married, neither could be forced to testify against the other. In 2012, the two were separated, and it appeared they were heading for divorce. Investigators knew their chance was coming, and in 2015, the investigation blew up. Denise filed for divorce, and it sent Brian into a tailspin, so he came up with a plan. At 2:30 a.m. on August 5th, 2016, Brian quietly hid himself in the trunk of Denise's SUV and waited until she came out to go to work. She got in the SUV to find Brian pointing a gun in her face. He then took her to a remote location where she was able to convince him that she didn't really want the divorce and that she actually wanted to stay with him. She swore not to call the police, and he decided to let her go. Unfortunately for him, she went right to the sheriff's office and filed a report for her kidnapping. Brian was quickly arrested. Under questioning, he confessed to the kidnapping, although he denied that the plan was actually a murder plot. He was told he would likely be found guilty and receive a 20-year sentence in prison. On a hunch, investigators played on his paranoia towards Denise. Brian began to feel that she would betray him to police for Mike's murder. Investigators then offered Brian an out. If he were able to tell them anything about Mike Williams' disappearance, he would not be charged for any part that he played in it. He accepted, and the story he told them was extremely disturbing. Brian claimed that Denise didn't want to share custody of Ansley, nor did she want a divorce due to her personal beliefs. That's when the two of them came up with the idea of a boating accident. On the day of their anniversary, Brian took Mike for a little duck hunting on Lake Seminole. While on the boat, he pushed Mike overboard, hoping he would drown. Instead, Mike managed to grab a hold of a stump that sat out in the water. As he struggled, waiting for help, Brian came up to the front of the stump and shot Mike in the face. He then carried his body to Carr Lake, which he knew had large mud holes that could easily hide a body. December of 2018, with little more than Brian's confession and circumstantial evidence, a jury found Denise guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy. She was sentenced to life in prison. Later, her murder conviction was actually overturned, but the conspiracy conviction still stands. She is now facing up to 30 years for that charge. After Denise's trial, Cheryl Williams had this to say about the conviction, quote, "I don't like having to ask the judge to put her in jail for the rest of her life. But what she did to Mike, she deserves, and I think God gave us justice. If she's locked up forever, you can't say you're happy. I'm not happy because I don't have Mike." Case cracked. I would like to thank the Washington Post, CBS News, the Tallahassee Democrat, and WCTV.tv. But the biggest thank you goes to Christy Arnhart for researching and writing up today's case, and here she is now to discuss it with us. Christy, this Brian guy, like, first of all, I want to say he seems really, really out there. But I'm also kind of confused with, he makes this plea deal, effectively winds up admitting that he committed a murder, but he's not charged. Did he face any time for anything around this?
Well, he faced 20 years. He has 20 years in prison for the kidnapping charges he received. But by telling them everything he knew about the murder, he did not get any charges.
This is kind of like, I mean, sometimes you hear about a plea deal and it's like, oh, okay, it makes sense. They got like the accessory to the murder to make the plea deal, and then they get the main person. This almost feels like a little backwards. Like it feels a little reversed in some way. But outside of that, just it makes you consider. I mean, this guy figures out some kind of murder plot and then pulls that one off, and then almost goes with a second, figures out another whole plot, sits in someone's SUV, terrorizes them to the point of them saying, "Yes, I love you. I'll never leave you. I won't tell anyone." Who would think of doing this kind of stuff, and how?
I don't know. I mean, he was just disturbing all around. In his testimony, he said that one day a thought crossed his mind. It was after one of his regular hunting trips with Mike, and Mike had fallen into a mud hole.
Okay.
He said that the ground seemed to collapse beneath him, almost like quicksand, and soon Mike was scrambling for help. Brian said, "I remember telling Denise about that and how, if I hadn't been there, if I hadn't helped him out, he very likely would have disappeared and nobody would have known what happened to him."
Wow. Can you imagine? I mean,
no, because that's not normal to have those thoughts.
No. And this guy's, I mean, having that thought, and then effectively it's like he regrets that he didn't do it at that time. So he goes back and tries to make that same accident appear to happen again. Wow.
Yeah.
And he does make Mike disappear, and he literally moves his body to a completely different location, a different body of water. Do we know how he did that? Because, I mean, he's talking about shooting this guy in the face, and now he's handling that body. Like, how does he do this?
Well, that's even crazier. He dragged Mike out of the water, back onto the boat, carried him back to his SUV. He then drove Mike's body beneath a tarp in the trunk to a Walmart where he bought shovels and weights. Then he went back to this, long remembered hunting spot that the two had so he could use all of his devices to get rid of him.
Wow. I also feel like there's a little bit of a missed opportunity in this story. Of course, with Case Cracked, I'm always trying to evaluate like the evidence and what could they have done with the evidence. And in this case, we have these items that show up that they're suspicious about. We have the waders, the jacket, the flashlight, and especially that, they look like they haven't been out in the elements for that long. Obviously, there's no alligator attack damage to them. Was there any forensic tests that were run on those items?
Not a one. When they started the investigation, it was for a missing persons. All of that stuff was given back to the family. So,
gotcha. I mean, it makes sense, but
it does. But you're like, oh, we could have used that.
Seriously, like, I mean, if they would have run like DNA on it and like, hey, Brian, your DNA is all over these waders. Like, I mean, it just would have headed things off, and quite honestly, maybe gotten some different charges in a different direction. I'm still like, I mean, do they imagine that Denise was the mastermind here just because she's the one that wound up with the insurance payment? Like, I don't know. I don't know.
I don't know either. I never really got the feeling that they were trying to say, she used him or he used her. It
Right.
just,
Right. Yeah. Like who's the person? I mean, because I guess you could look at it that way. Like she's the one that's organizing it, and then effectively he plays the role of the hitman. But they're in a relationship together. They get married at
mhm,
some point. I'm sure those finances commingle, or he is at least getting some benefits of those insurance payouts as well.
mhm.
Speaking of which, whatever happened with the insurance money?
The insurance money, that was really good. I enjoyed that part of it. According to Tallahassee.com, in July of 2019, Mike and Denise's daughter, Ansley, was awarded all assets of her late father's estate, including insurance money due to Denise. Her
Okay.
mother signed it over to her to avoid prosecution on 3 counts of insurance fraud. So, as part of that deal, Ansley may not use any of the money on her mother's legal fees. And if she does, she's going to owe a penalty of $150,000.
Mm, okay. Yeah, because I looked into it again. I've looked into this search several times over the past several years as we hit stories like this. It really depends on the company,
Mhm.
but in many cases for a homicide, for a legit homicide, those insurance companies will pay out. So I could see that the money, wouldn't have tried to be recollected by them or something
Mhm.
because of Denise being involved in the murder. But that's interesting. So they slide it over to Ansley, and maybe that's the best thing here. It's unfortunate because this is another situation where we have a child that has parents that one parent that does something really stupid. Effectively, the child loses both parents in this,
Yeah.
um, which is really, really tough. And that kind of
Well,
raises a question because Ansley, we know, has that grandmother over on Mike's
mhm.
side. Did they ever reconnect?
No,
Mm,
they never did. And Cheryl just took it as the price she paid for looking for her son.
wow. Everyone paying steep prices in all kinds of different ways on this case.
Yes, very.
Yeah. Christy, thank you so much for your time and energy on this. We really appreciate you. And I've got some other people to thank right now. Thank you, PayPal supporters Brandy Fry, Sigrid E. O'Hearn, Jennifer Dixon, and Angela Welch Sola. For over 6 years, we have always run limited commercial ads here on YouTube, and we can't do that without support. If you'd like to help the channel keep going and growing, please visit lordandarts.com. There you can sign up for Patreon, sign up for PayPal, buy merchandise, or even just buy us a coffee like Kelly recently did. Can't donate? Please take a second and hit that like button. It actually does help the channel's exposure, and we want our cases to be seen by as many people as possible. Remember, you can get another Lord and Art story every week on the Seriously Mysterious podcast. A new episode is coming tomorrow and every Tuesday after that. Visit seriouslymysterious.com and remember to subscribe on your favorite podcatchers. Also, don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell icon below if you want to catch one of our weekly Secret Studio live shows. And of course, I'll be back with a new unsolved mystery for you on Friday, right here on the Lord and Arts channel.